How's it going, PengPirates Crew? It's Adrian here, and we're back with another video. So 2 more leaders got leaked for OP04, and usually I like to wait till everything is leaked until I talk about them as a whole. So right now we're going to talk about every leader that has been leaked so far, and I'm also going to rate them in terms of 1 to 5 stars. And then also in terms of what cards we've seen so far and what cards we know exist right now in OP 1 through 3. And it'll just be fun, right? Because if I'm wildly wrong about something, that'll be really funny. And then if I'm on the money on something, I could say I'm very good at predicting card games and stuff. But with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about some of these new leaders, starting with the ones that were leaked today. And I'm going to talk about Isho. So Isho Fujitora is coming in as a leader, which is awesome. He's one of my favorite admirals in the series. And he's coming in as a dual colored leader, so you'll notice that every leader that was leaked is going to be a dual color leader. I don't know if we're even going to have any monocolor leaders in this set, but I think that as a concept is just super cool. So he's going to come in as a green and black leader with 4 life, and that base stat line of 5,000 power. And he has 2 parts to his effect, which is always really good to see on a leader. One part of it is, if he has a Dawn under him during your turn, you're going to give -1 cost to all of your opponent's characters. And this is not only insane for your Navy effects that have, you have cards like Kobe, which are going to pop a 3 cost. Now you're popping things like a 4 cost character. Okiku can now rest 6 cost characters. X-Drake could KO up to a 5 cost. There's just a numerous amount of applications for this. And then on this topic in general, this might be one of the most synergistic dual color leaders we have ever seen before. Because on the green side, while you have a lot of board control and card advantage mechanics, which is insanely good, you lack the hard removal that other decks have, right? So if they end up with a 9 cost Whitebeard on the board, that thing is going to stay on the board for basically the entire game. Because green removal basically boils down to either KOing a rested character, which is usually a low cost character, so it's not even going to work on something high cost like a Kuzan or a Whitebeard, and then also just resting and swinging into it, which causes its own problems, right? Because if it's a high attack character like Kuzan, you might be spending too much Dawn to even reasonably swing at it. But that's where the black side of this deck comes in, right? Because even in the base card set for OP2 that we got, there are a lot of removal options for you. You have Sakazuki combos, you have 4 cost Kuzan comboing with other things with Kobe, 10 cost Kuzan. There's just so many combos that you could do even right now with the cards that we have in OP2, where you could just combo them to remove these big things off the board. And then on the flip side with black, you have a ton of removal options, but most of these removal options come at a big cost of discarding a card, and that's where green comes in, right? Because they have so many cards that just draw you more cards, like 2 cost Blocker Killer, and Raizo will draw you cards, and that could help you recoup and just kind of account for this weakness that black has, where you have to discard these cards to use these big KO effects. And then if that wasn't enough, at the end of your turn, you could pay 1 Dawn, and then that's going to let you set one of your characters with a cost of 5 or less as active. And this effect is absolutely insane to me because green and black have these blockers that just sit on the board in Trafalgar Law and Borsalino, but now they're basically turned into pseudo 7 cost kids, right? Because you could still attack with them, address things on board, and then at the end of your turn, all you have to do is pay 1 Dawn to restand them, and you could use them as a blocker for the next turn. But this could potentially be a really oppressive leader skill as well with cards like Okiku and Basil Hawkins. Okiku is such an oppressive card still in this format, and it could just kind of sit on the board until you need it to rest something of high value like a Borsalino or a 5 cost blocker, and until then, they are going to have to address it with some sort of removal card. But this forces your opponent to address it with a removal card because they can't even swing into your Okiku anymore because you could just restand it at the end of the turn. Similarly, Basil Hawkins could get 2 attacks off and still get restood at the end of the turn to be safe so that you have to use removal on him, which is absolutely insane to me. And then also you have cards that have double attack and double attack banish with Yamato and Smoker that could get restood after they attempt to swing for life. And if we're talking about Yamato, they have to use removal on it if you keep restanding it. But if we're talking about 5 cost Smoker, it's going to be so difficult to remove this card because you basically have to either rest it and swing at it, which is going to be difficult because he's at 7k power, or you're going to have to bounce it if you're playing something like blue. So because of all these reasons, I think Isho is going to be a 5-star leader. We already have a ton of combos that we can do right now with like OP1 and OP2 cards. I could only imagine the kind of support this is going to get in OP4. We're probably going to get some specific cards that are like within archetype for this deck, which is going to make it like even more crazy. But as of right now, like this leader is going to be absolutely busted, and I think it's going to be one of the best dual color leaders in the game. Moving on to our other card that got leaked today, which is Queen. He's going to be a blue and yellow dual color leader, which can also have a little bit of synergies, right? Yellow, they like manipulating their life and their trigger cards. And usually the way that they do this is like they'll even add life from the top of their deck, which can be really important synergy with the blue cards, right? Because we have cards like Perona and Doflamingo that are going to let you rearrange your deck so that you know what's on the top. Maybe you use a card like that and then, you know, place a really good trigger on the top of your life. But let's get into this leader effect. It's one of the more complicated ones. So when attacking, if Queen has a Dawn under him, if the total number of cards in your life and hand is 4 or less. So basically this leader will activate, you know, if you have 4 life, it'll activate when you have 0 cards in hand. If you have 2 life, it'll activate if you have 2 cards in hand. You basically want to just look at the combination between your hand and your life. So if you look at between the hand and the life, if it's 4 or less, you're going to draw 1 card. But this effect changes if you have an 8 cost character on the board. Because if you have an 8 cost on the board, instead of drawing the card, you could actually place the card on the top of your deck on the top of your life instead. So I actually don't think this leader is going to be that strong as of right now. If we get more in archetype cards in OP4 that just like completely play around this deck, I can see it having success. But in general, like if we are getting to such low life and low hand counts, it's going to be a lot harder to counter out of things. And you might just die way quicker than you're able to heal. Because without the cards that we know right now, just with the leader skill, you're only able to heal 1 damage at a time per turn. And if it requires you to have a lower hand size, because the more life you heal for, the lower your hand size has to be, it's going to be way harder to defend multiple attacks, right? Because, for example, let's say that I have 2 life and 2 cards in hand. If I use this effect to heal myself, I better have something like blockers or like a lot of counters in my hand, because I'm only going to be at 2 cards in hand to defend against like multiple 5k swings, right? Because at this point in the game, if you have an 8 cost on the board, chances are there's going to be multiple things from your opponent that can attack into your leader. And if I have such a low hand count, I can work with things like Love Beam and everything like that, but eventually I am going to run out of cards in my hand. It's kind of the same problem with Ivankov, right? Where I can cycle for as much as I can in the early to mid game, but in the late game when they have like multiple attacks and multiple big swings, it's going to get way harder to counter out of these things with such a low hand count. And unless we get some big defensive options like big blockers in this deck or like some really good counter events, I don't really see this having the same staying power that like Isho has. I think it's going to be very specific to the archetype in this format. But as always, people are very creative, and maybe I'm just not thinking of any synergies between the cards that other people would be, and it would just be really cool to be proven wrong in this case. So with that being said, I think Queen is actually going to be like a 1-star leader. I don't think this is going to see a lot of play unless the cards surrounding this archetype are really good. And also on top of that, even if that does happen, I do think that this is kind of going to be like an OP4 specific deck, and it's not going to have a lot of staying power and be played in the meta like moving forward after that. Moving on to our new dual color Dofi leader at 4 life. He's going to be a green and purple leader with the simple effect that at the end of your turn, you're going to set up to 2 of your Dawn cards as active. So not even looking at the cards that this combos with within the set, because he does have cards that do stuff that if you have 2 Dawn cards active, or like you can rest 2 active Dawn cards on your opponent's turn. But not even looking at that, just thinking about this card as it is right now, I think this is going to be an insanely strong card. Green and purple as a color synergy works really well because they're both really good at controlling the board in different ways. Green is going to net you like a ton of board control mechanics in terms of like resting with Okiku and everything like that, and it's going to draw you a bunch of cards, while purple is going to be that removal that you need. And just being able to use 2 Dawn every single turn on things like a Hell's Judgment or like even a Punk Gibson in the early game are going to be absolutely insane. I think this deck is going to be insanely good into aggro, and it's going to be very hard for aggro players to beat this deck because you're going to have cards like Hell's Judgment being thrown around to stop multiple attacks. You know, Punk Gibson is also going to stop like at least 2 attacks in this scenario. So I think this leader is going to be very good as it stands right now. And we haven't even seen the new events that they're going to have for this leader. But I think as a leader, this is just so generic and it's going to have a lot of staying power in the meta, because at any point when good event cards for green and purple come out, this is always going to be like a relevant leader. I feel like this is going to be the same with like Isho and of course like Trafalgar Law. We've seen them have so much staying power because their leaders are so generic and they give you so much value. I think Doflamingo is also going to be in that camp in terms of value over time. So with that being said, I think Doflamingo is definitely going to be a 5-star card. That leader skill is just so generic and there's so many different ways that you can apply it defensively. And also on top of that, this deck is only going to get better and better as more event options come out as the game goes on. So moving on to our third Croc leader in the game, he's going to be a purple and yellow leader, which is really cool for all our Lakers fans. He's going to be at 4 life with the effect of once per turn on your opponent's turn. When you go like Dawn minus due to an effect, you're also going to add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. As of right now, there aren't actually a lot of ways to activate this leader skill. Mainly the ways that we're going to do that right now is through event cards like Hell's Judgment and trigger effects like Shiki, where you have to go Dawn -1 to play them. We actually also have a couple of cards that got leaked. So we have the Miss All Sunday card that costs -2 Dawn to play her on trigger. And then we also have the new 8 cost Croc card that when your opponent's attacking once per turn, you could go Dawn -1 and draw 1 card and trash 1 card from your hand. And these could potentially be really cool, right? Because you're mitigating the Dawn minus effect by ramping during your opponent's turn. And then also you're getting it as an active Dawn, which means that you could combo it with other events and stuff like that. But in general, I don't think this is going to be hugely impactful for the game, right? Because you're using a 4-life leader, your leader skill better be relevant throughout every point of the game and also be hugely impactful, because being at 4 life is a huge disadvantage. And I just don't think Croc is ever going to get to a point where mitigating going Dawn -1, once per turn is really going to affect and impact the game as a whole. I think the cards surrounding this might potentially be really good and synergistic with this leader, but in terms of just this leader in a vacuum, I do not think this card is that good. So with that being said, this is going to lead me to give this card a 2-star rating right now. I would love to be proven wrong because Croc is one of my favorite characters in the anime, and we haven't had a lot of luck with him in the TCG. But as it stands right now, I just think his effect is way too weak and it's not as impactful as the other leader effects that you can be running, which leads me to give him a low star rating. So moving on to kind of a new archetype of leader that we've seen, dual color leaders that have 5 life. Starting off with Rebecca, she's going to be a blue and black leader that also can't attack. So that's the way that they're kind of balancing this. You can have a dual color leader and you can have your 5 life, but you aren't going to get value every turn out of an attack. And then her effect is activate main once per turn, you could rest 1 Dawn, and if you have 6 or less cards in your hand, you're going to look at the top 2 cards from your deck and reveal up to 1 Dressrosa type card and then add it to your hand, trash the rest. So we're going to try our best to rate this leader, but honestly, we can't really get a good reading on it because we haven't seen a lot of the Dressrosa cards. You can use effects like Perona and Doflamingo to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and rearrange them, so you're going to be drawing into a Dressrosa card. But in general, you're probably going to want to run a majority of Dressrosa type cards so that you can, blind hit into one. So assuming these Dressrosa cards are relatively good, this leader effect is actually really insane, right? Because every single turn, you could potentially draw a card for only 1 Dawn. And blue and black as a color synergy is really good because they're so good at controlling the board without attacking into anything. And their effect can actually work really well with the black cards, right? Because again, to use these big KO effects, you usually have to discard a card. So if you have your hand size low, you could always just recoup your resources every single turn by drawing twice potentially. So just because you're drawing so many cards throughout the game, I do think that this is going to be a very strong leader, even though she cannot attack herself. And I think, getting access to the black cards is really important for blue because they don't have a lot of removal for high cost cards. And it's one of the main problems with the deck right now, right? 8 cost Kid is a menace against blue because they don't have a good removal card for it. But with the black cards, you could potentially just KO it or reduce its cost to even Mihawk it. So I think for those reasons, between all the card advantage you're getting and all of the synergies between the 2 colors, I actually think this leader is going to be a little bit stronger than we think. And I really want to revisit this leader when we look at all the Dressrosa cards as a whole, but as of right now, I think this is going to be a pretty alright leader. So that's going to lead me to give this a 3-star rating. We mainly need to just see what the Dressrosa type cards are and see if they're good enough to play, but in general, just drawing 2 cards per turn potentially is just really insane in terms of card advantage throughout the game. And I imagine that between 2 colors, the Dressrosa type cards are probably going to be at least decent to play, so you're going to be generating a lot of value while also playing these cards. And even if your leader can't attack, like just that value alone can, really win you a lot of games. So moving on to our last leader, we have Vivi. She is also going to be a 5-life dual color leader. So because of that, of course, she can't attack. And then also she gets the effect of once per turn, if you rest 2 Dawn, you're going to be able to draw a card, and then up to one of your characters is going to gain Rush for this turn. So I already think this effect is going to be insanely strong, and this is probably going to have a lot of staying power in the meta moving forward, because both of those effects are completely generic. With Rebecca, you saw that you had to draw into like a Dressrosa type character. With Vivi, you just get to draw 1 card. So like, let's say you go second, you're going to be drawing 2 cards for that turn for a 7-card hand at the very start of the game. And then on top of that, you're going to be able to give one of your cards Rush. And there's also no restriction on that. There's no cost restriction, no type restriction, as long as it's like 8 cost or lower, because, it's gonna take 2 Dawn to rest and use this effect. Everything is fair game. So things like Treasure Cup Ace might be a really cool combo to do, because now he turns into a double attack Rush character. Boa Hancock might be a really cool combo to do, because you could just draw 2 cards if you have like 5 or less in hand. There's just so many things that you can do, and like so many different combinations that you could play in different ways. Like you could play aggressively with this deck because you get the Rush cards and the cycle. You could also play more of a control style, like because you're netting 2 cards every single turn. Like that's something very important. And the only huge drawback of this card is the fact that it can't attack, and I don't know how impactful that's going to be yet, because we see things like Iceberg, they're not doing a lot of waves in OP3, but Iceberg's effect in general is like a lot weaker than Vivi's effect. So if it turns out that this leader cannot attack effect isn't really as impactful as I think it's going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if this leader had so much staying power like within the game's lifespan, because again, like those 2 effects are just incredibly generic, and they're also just generically good. We might have to like deal with Vivi throughout this entire game's lifespan. So with that being said, I think I'm going to give Vivi a 4-star rating for this. Her effects are insanely good and generic. I think they're gonna last a long time in this game, but the fact that she can't attack is just such a huge drawback that I think it is going to be a huge problem for the deck and its strength moving forward. But again, I just think these effects are insanely good that it might not even matter that the leader can't attack. But what do you guys think about these leaders moving forward? Did I hit some marks? Did I miss, in your opinion? Let me know in the comments down below, and remember to be nice. Like, these are just my initial thoughts about them, and this is mainly just for fun and just to laugh at, like when these cards eventually do hit the meta. My opinions aren't law. This was mainly just to have a fun discussion about these really cool new leaders that we're gonna get in OP4. But again, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, and good luck in, any of your school or work ventures, and I'll see you on the next one.